Welcome back to the Whole Bible series. This week we are in the Psalms. Tehillim is part of the writings in the Tanakh in our Bible. Psalms is part of the Old Testament poetical books, which include wisdom literature. Here's a quote from the Survey of the Old Testament. The Psalms speak often of a desire to be in God's presence in the temple and of the delight to be found in the law that provides a guideline for being in relationship with God. The book also testifies to God's presence with individuals in crisis and with his people in troubled times. God is praised for his presence with his people. For more information on the Psalms, go back to episode 21. So Psalms is the 19th book of the Bible. The Psalms are written by many different authors over a period of about 900 years. We know that authors, only by their attributed titles at the head of the Psalms, out of 150 Psalms, 116 have titles. From those with titles, only about 100 have an attributed author. And so I have them broken down here. David is attributed 73, Asaph 12, the sons of Korah 10, Solomon 2, Moses 1, Heman 1, Ethan 1. Note that a few of these titles may not indicate an author, but actually someone whom the psalm was dedicated to. Also, the New Testament attributes 2 additional untitled psalms to David. While the psalms were likely being arranged either during or just after the time of David, evidence from Qumran shows that their final arrangement was not set until approximately 1st century BC. Again, for more information, go back to episode 21. So I want to ask, what is the purpose of the Psalms? And so we have 2 perspectives here. First, the ancient Hebrew perspective that comes from the Survey of the Old Testament. The purpose of the Psalm, or of the book of Psalms, is to use the familiar hymns of Israel to provide a cantata-like presentation of God's kingship through his anointed representatives, the kings of David's line. In the process, it shows God as one who delights in rewarding the righteous and who will bring punishment on the wicked. The themes and message of the book are embedded in Psalms 1, 2, and 145. And then from the Hebrew, the modern Hebrew perspective, this comes from a description of the Psalms, an English translation by Schneerson and Marcus. They say this: Tehillim is recited by Jewish people collectively and individually as the desire occurs to offer praise and thanksgiving to God, or alternatively, in times of crisis and need as a form of supplication, and even as a venue to express regret for sin. The Tzemach Tzedek said, if one would only know the power of verses in Tehillim and their effect on high, one would recite them continuously. The verses of Tehillim transcend all barriers and ascend higher and higher, imploring the master of the universe until they achieve results of kindness and mercy. So let's look at some of the themes in the songs. So the Psalms are quite wide in their different themes. And so these are some of the themes: laments, hymns of praise, hymns of thanksgiving, hymns celebrating God's law, wisdom psalms, songs of confidence, royal psalms, historical psalms, prophetic hymns, penitent psalms, claims of innocence, yearnings for God, curses against enemies, liturgical psalms, plus many combinations of these different psalms together. A few interesting notes there. So we talked about the Psalms 1 and 2 being an introduction. The oldest psalm would be Psalm 90, which was written by Moses, and that would date it approximately 1450, if that is true. Psalm 117 through 119 is interesting. In Psalm 117, you have the shortest psalm, which is only 2 verses long. In Psalm 119, you have the longest psalm, which is 176 verses. In the middle of that, Psalm 118 is the dead middle chapter of the Bible. There's 494 chapters before, and there's 494 chapters after. That makes Psalm 118:8 the middle verse of the Bible. And this is what it says: "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man." Well, maybe we can sum up the Bible in just that. Also down here, you'll see that Psalm 14 and 53 are almost identical. And also Hebrew tradition attributes 15 additional Psalms to David, 9 additional to Moses, and 1 each to Zechariah and Haggai. So now we come to Psalms. Psalms is broken into, instead of sections, it's broken into 5 books. And so we're going to kind of go through these books. Going back to dating, this is the timeline that we've been using throughout the historical books. You can see that Psalms dates from approximately 1450 BC all the way to 550 BC. So this covers a large period of time, one that goes well beyond our timeline. Off to book 1. And so we come to chapter 1 in book 1. This is, again, the introduction. Chapter 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So note here to the left from the Bible Knowledge Commentary, it says Psalm 1 is a fitting introduction for the Psalter, in that it summarizes the 2 ways open to mankind, the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. It may be classified as a wisdom psalm because of its emphasis on these 2 ways of life, the use of the similes, the announcement of blessing, and the centrality of the law for fulfillment in life. Chapter 2. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them with his fury, saying, "As for me, I have set a king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell you the decree. The Lord said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you.' Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him." Again, a note from the Bible Knowledge Commentary. It says, the first 3 verses express the psalmist's amazement at the plans of the nations of the Lord, or of the nations to overthrow the Lord and his anointed one. This is translated from the word Messiah, or Mashiach, which is also translated in Greek into Christos, which is where we get Christ. Continue on. "You are my son," quoted from the Davidic covenant, is appropriated here by the king to show his legitimate right to rule. Today then refers to the coronation day. And the expression "I have begotten you" refers not to a physical birth, but as an extended metaphor describing him becoming God's son. So going back to Mashiach, or the anointed one, this is what kingly speech was in the Old Testament. When you see Mashiach or the anointed, it's referring to God's earthly king. Down here I also have a note, just says the passage was a royal psalm in the Old Testament and therefore used by the Davidic kings. So if you're thinking ahead into the New Testament, where we run into the Mashiach as Christ, you're jumping ahead of us here. And this psalm is meant specifically at this point to the line of David, to the ruling king. It will get grabbed and used in the New Testament also to represent Christ. Let's move on. Thereafter, in the rest of the book, Psalms 3 through 41 are called the Davidic Group Number 1. In Book 1, 37 of 41 Psalms, all except 1 and 2, 10 and 33, are all ascribed to David. There's a note here from the Survey of the Old Testament. Book 1 contains mostly laments, and many of the Psalms make some mention of the psalmist's enemies. As the writer cries out to God for vindication and deliverance, we can easily see the correlation of this book to the time David spent in the wilderness fleeing from Saul. Psalms 3 through 13 would parallel 1 Samuel 19:23, the beginning of David's troubles with Saul. Psalm 18 reports deliverance from the enemies and could correlate to 1 Samuel 24, where David spares Saul's life and Saul stops the chase. Psalms 23 through 24 appear strikingly appropriate for 1 Samuel 25, when God provides for David's needs through the wisdom of Abigail. Parallels to David's second sparing of Saul's life can be seen in Psalms 27 through 30. In general, the tone of the Psalms of the first book fits well with this period of David's life. So that explains why it's called the Davidic Group Number 1. And from there, we move on to Book 2. So Book 2 ranges from Psalm 42 to Psalm 72. And there are multiple groups here. We have Psalms 42 through 49 that are called the Sons of Korah group. So these are Psalms typically written by the Sons of Korah, which is a group of servants within the temple who are known for singing. Distinguished amongst those are Psalm 45, which is a coronation hymn for David, and Psalm 48, which is correlates to the conquest of Jerusalem. All right, this is where David set up his reign, was in Jerusalem when they conquered the Jebusites. We then have another group from Psalms 51 through 65 that's called Davidic Group 2. So this is a second group of Davidic Psalms. And in there we have Psalm 51, which gives David repenting concerning his sin with Bathsheba. The remaining Psalms that are not mentioned in those two groups are not grouped. Those are off on their own. They don't have a specific group there, so they just are fit in wherever the compiler of the Psalms placed them. The Bible Knowledge Commentary says this: in Book 2, 7 Psalms, Psalms 42, 44 through 49, have the headings of the Sons of Korah. This is probably not a designation of the authors, but a reference to the fact that these psalms were delivered to them to be performed. One psalm in Book 2 is by Asaph, Psalm 50. 20 are by David. That's where we get the Davidic Group 2. 3 are anonymous, and 1 is by Solomon. Survey of the Old Testament says this about the book. As a whole, the Psalms can be correlated with the events of David's reign as recorded in 2 Samuel. Another major section of laments in Psalms 54 through 64 would parallel the crisis represented in Absalom's rebellion, with David being driven from the throne by his own son. And we'll come to Book 3. So Book 3 spans from Psalm 73 through 89. Again, we have multiple groups in this book. Psalms 73 through 83 are called the Asaph group. So these will be psalms attributed to Asaph. Psalm 80 or 78 reflects on the fall of the northern kingdom. Psalms 84 through 88 are called the Sons of Korah Group Two. So we have some more psalms from the Sons of Korah group, specifically not Psalms 86. Psalm 86 and 89 are actually not grouped, and Psalm 89 is in reference to the 8th century Assyrian crisis in southern Israel or Judah. Bible Knowledge Commentary says this: 11 of the 17 Psalms in this section are attributed to Asaph, 1 to David, 3 to the sons of Korah, 1 to Heman, and another to Ethan. Asaph, Heman, and Ethan were Levite musicians in David's day. So again, we have a lot of Levites. These are the priestly servants of the temple who are grouped into a section of singers. These guys are either writing or performing multiple psalms. Survey of the Old Testament says this: Book 3 is more difficult to assess than the other books. This is because it is composed of 2 collections that we assume have been placed accordingly to chronology. Psalm 78 appears to offer the most insight to its orientation, with a possible correlation to the fall of the northern kingdom. Because the same Psalm 89, offers a crisis and apparently a resolution of the crisis, the book may be limited to the Assyrian crisis in the latter half of the 8th century BC, though it could refer to the entire period from Solomon to the fall of Jerusalem. Specifically, I want to look here at Psalm 82. I think there's a good portion that we can take out of this. This is representative of the types of psalms that we see in this section. So looking back, 82 is a part of the Asaph group. So this is a psalm either written or performed by Asaph. Let's see what it says. So it should say Psalm 82:1 there rather than 1:1. Psalm 82:1. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundation of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. Okay, so this gets us back to the whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview idea that we had been discussing, especially in the Pentateuch. This idea that God has created these divine beings to help him rule justly over the land, and these divine rulers have turned their back on God and have gathered this worship for themselves. And so God tells them here in this psalm that they're going to die like men, that he is going to take the earth back. He's going to take it back for himself and reclaim it. And this is what we see in the New Testament. So we'll talk about that when we get there. So one other note that I want you to see in here, just from Selah, this is a word that happens to be found a lot in the Psalms and some more in the wisdom literature or in the poetical books. Selah, you can see here, likely a musical or liturgical term. The term may refer to silence, pause, or interlude. However, the exact meaning of the Hebrew term is unknown. This term primarily occurs in the Psalms, but also in Habakkuk, which is in the prophets. The Septuagint interprets the term as diapsalma, likely meaning pause or interlude. Okay, so again, these are songs or psalms that are spoken. So people would recite these. And so Selah then could mark a point where they're supposed to pause as part of the rhythm of the psalm itself. We'll move on to Book 4. Book 4 stretches from Psalm 90 through 106. Psalms 95 through 100 are called the Congregational Praise Group 1. The remaining psalms in the section are not grouped, but there are some important psalms. Psalm 90 is Moses' anticipation of exile. Psalm 103 is discussion of God's forgiveness of Israel. And Psalm 106 is introspection of the destruction of the temple. The Bible Knowledge Commentary says this: in this section, 17 psalms, all but 3 are anonymous. Psalm 90 was written by Moses, and Psalms 101 and 103 were composed by David. Survey of the Old Testament says this: Book 4 begins with a psalm of Moses and ends with a recapitulation of a history of rebellion, leading to hope and a plea for restoration. Okay, so again, we can look back up there. Moses kicks it off with expecting the exile, and Psalm 106 is then the Israelites having introspection, looking back at the destruction of the temple and seeking forgiveness and restoration. Continuing on, along the way, it includes a small collection of praise psalms, 95 through 100, that appropriately presents the affirmations of hope and faith sustained in the exile. Themes in this small collection include the Lord as King, a new song, deliverance, idol worshipers put to shame, Yahweh above all gods, judgment on the nations, and the continuing faithfulness of the Lord. And finally, Book 5. So Book 5 has several groups. This goes from 107 through 150. Psalms 111 through 117 are called the Hallelujah group. 120 through 134, the songs of ascent to Jerusalem. Psalms 138 through 145 are the Davidic Group 3, so another group of Davidic psalms. And then Psalms 146 through 150 are called the Congregational Praise Group 2. So closing out the book with praise to Yahweh. The remaining of the psalms in the section are not grouped, including Psalm 110, which is the return of victorious kingship, and Psalm 119, which correlates to the establishment of the law. Bible Knowledge Commentary says this: of these 44 psalms, 15 are by David, 1 is by Solomon, and the other 28 are anonymous. Survey of the Old Testament says Book 5 begins with Psalm 107, the Israelites' thankfulness to God for regathering them. Psalm 145 provides a conclusion to Book 5, while Psalms 146 through 150 serve as the finale to the entire cantata. So again, we have Psalms 1 and 2 as the introduction. Psalms 146 to 150 is your finale, praising Yahweh. So we come to the end of the Psalms. So what are our takeaways? And that's what I want to talk about before we close. There's a note here from Survey of the Old Testament. It says the book of Psalms uses the praise, complaint, and exhortation of God's people to reveal the character of God. So we learn about God through the Psalms. As readers to whom the authority of God's word is important, our task is to submit ourselves to the God who is here revealed. Praise psalms extol the attributes and actions of God and compel us to kneel before him. Wisdom psalms explore theological principles for means to comprehend God's ways, Lament psalms help us to see God through the emotional struggles of a believer in crisis who is thrown to dependence on him. The historical books help us learn more about God by telling his stories. But the Psalms give us a different perspective by helping us come into contact with God through our daily experiences and the questions that arise from them. Just one more note here from the Lexham Bible Dictionary says that most Psalms were originally set prayers intended to guide worshipers in articulating their cries of distress and their celebration of God's goodness and power. They are meant to lead the worshiper's experience of God through times of trial and times of worship. Therefore, we should see the Psalms in the same way, that we should read them and learn about God, learn about his character, and seek to call out to him and express ourselves through the Psalms. That seems to be what they were put there for, is to help God's people communicate to him their feeling. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be even angry at God. But we still need to communicate to God. God doesn't just communicate to us, or we don't just communicate to God. It's a two-way communication. But we need to reach out to God regardless of what we're going through and how we're feeling. And we need to speak to him and cry out to him. And so I hope this helps you understand a little bit about the Psalms. Obviously, we couldn't go through all 150 chapters tonight. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll be able to get into them more in depth. But if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Please write them down below. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a great night.